Right, well, we are back on the bank today to film the latest mini masterclass for the Matrix series, and we've come to Birch House Fisheries, which is where we filmed the 12 tips of Christmas on a slightly colder day than this. And what we're going to do today is we're going to film some early season, or very early season. We're just in February, a typical commercial, and just the little tweaks I think make a difference on either being positive or negative, and just the ways of approaching your match to make sure you get the best out your session during this time of year, because it can be, for all of us, a really frustrating time when we're not too sure whether they're going to feed or whether they're going to not. I just want to show you a few little tips to make the most of it, to make sure you don't knacker your peg too quickly. But first, I'm going to get this one in. Wow. Right, so say we come dead typical commercial for this time of year. We come to say Birch House Lakes, which is quite a mixed fishery, but there's a lot of carp in here, which is typical for most of the venues we go to at this time of year. And as I said, we're in February, so although we are, without a doubt, we're getting it so lucky. The weather's been really good. I think it's about 11-12 degrees now, so it's been great. But the fish, they're still not, they're waking up a little, but they're far from the usual summer feeding habits or even the spring feeding habits. They're very lethargic. They don't want a lot of bait. So what you tend to find this year a lot of the time is that because it's nice and mild, we all race there really excited in the morning, and many anglers blow the peg instantly just by being too positive, going for it at the start of the day, when the fish, they're simply not ready for it yet. So we took the water temperature of the day and it's still around 5 degrees, which is, it's nearly as low as it gets. The worst I've seen is probably 3 degrees, so it's freezing. So you can't expect the fish to be feeding as avidly as they would when it's nice and warm. So because of this, what I want to go through today is the two sort of separate approaches I employ to make sure I get the best of both. Yeah, I think it's very important at this time of year to start as if it's rock bottom, as if it's not so much dobbing and not feeding anything, but start very negatively, just to try and get a bite. I mean, that's going to stack the odds in my favour of catching a few fish by using the correct baits to keep me as accurate as possible, baits that are more susceptible to getting eaten by anything. You know what I mean? Nice versatile baits that could catch anything. And then later on in the session, when they're often inclined to feed at this time of the year, sort of 1 o'clock onwards, then I can change my match completely and I can really go for it. I can have a line with much more selective baits, much more positively fed or fed in different ways. So I give myself the best of both chances of either catching a lot of fish if they're going to feed, but at the same time, I'll start off negative so I don't spoil my peg, just in case it catches me off guard and it fishes really difficult. So say what I want to run through next, I'm going to run through two separate ways of doing things. I'm going to start off really negative with me micro pellets and just a few little tips about keeping things accurate, and then hopefully later in the day when they start having a feed, we're going to get the catty out, give them some hard pellets and really see if they're having a feed. Right, so first I just want to cover quickly the baits I'm going to use and the reasons that I'm going to use them in both areas, and the rigs I'm going to use over the top of the two areas. So like I say, I've got two different options in this peg. I want a negatively fed line that's going to give me a chance of catching anything if it's hard, and I'm going to have I'm going to call it positively fed, but fed in a positive fashion more. It's not a case of putting loads of bait in, it's a case of feeding it with a catapult, nice and regular, making things happen. Or fishing negatively, which I'm going to do with my micro pellets, and being really boring if you like, and I'm just going to put a tiny little ball and being able to fish over it, be as accurate as I possibly can, which the two baits I'm going to use, they're going to lend themselves perfectly for those two different ways of fishing. So firstly, I've got my micro pellets. I mean, for me, they're my most versatile bait I can possibly use, other than maybe a maggot, in catching anything. I mean, by feeding micro pellets, fishing the expander, I can catch roach, skimmers, I can catch anything. I mean, it's going to give me a bite, but more importantly, with a micro pellet, I can be extremely accurate with how my feed lands on the bottom. So I can ship out there, feed possibly a small little ball, and get it to land in a tighter pile than I could do with pretty much any other bait. Which, if there's very few fish feeding, that stacks the odds in my favour of getting a bite, because I've got such an accurate way of feeding and such a small pile of bait. Because I'm doing that, the rig that I'm going to use in that case is going to lend itself to all about stability. I mean, I've talked about this so many times before with soft pellet fishing, and it's vital to be as heavy and as stable as possible to hold your rig right over that tiny pile of bait you put in order to present your bait correctly. Do you know what I mean? The last thing I want is a really light style rig to present my expander pellet when I've got a tiny pile of bait on the bottom. I mean, it's going to make it very difficult for me to land that bait on that pile every time. So my rig for that lends itself perfectly to keeping things nice and tight, which has got a 4/16 float and big heavy shot in, say, in the bottom third of my rig, bottom third of my rig, we're going to say. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 number 8s. So a really positive rig that's going to get me bait down really quickly, and it's going to keep my bait nice and static over that tiny pile that I'm going to put in. So what this rig does do though, or doesn't do, it doesn't give myself any option of any other forms of presentation. I mean, that's only going to catch fish that want to be on the bottom. Also, with the micro pellets that I'm going to feed, that's almost matches to that. It's not a bait that I want to, I can't loose feed it. I mean, I can't feed it with a catapult. I'm very limited to how I feed it and what it does in my peg. So I don't want fish coming up feeding through the water on micro pellets, because they're going to be very difficult to catch doing so. So by keeping my feed really sensible, just feeding small balls, getting them down as quick as possible, and using the correct rig to sort of emulate the same sort of thing with my hook bait, that's going to put everything as sort of as matched as it possibly can be to give me a bite. Yeah, it's a mistake I see a lot of people doing, is fishing the wrong rigs, sometimes with the wrong baits, to try and create a form of presentation that isn't possible with that rig. So that's the one thing I want to get away from. I want to keep things really simple. So that's how I'm going to fish things on my negative line. So nice and accurate, put a ball in, every rig with an expander over the top, catch what I can. In completely contrast to that, my other rig, what I've set up with there, I've set up a lighter float, set up a 4x12s rig, and that's going to be fished exactly the same depth, just in a different area of my peg. But there I'm going to have the options of loose feeding baits. I'm going to swap baits completely to hard pellets. And what a hard pellet does, while it can be more selective for the fish I'm going to catch, it gives me far more options in the way I can feed it. I mean, if I want, I can tap a few pellets in with my cup and sit over a tight pile, although it'll be a little bit, my rig's quite not as stable as the other rig would be. But I can also loose feed it, I can do whatever I want with it. I can throw them, I can catch them, I can feed them at any point I want. And in turn, it gives the fish options of feeding through the water. And my rig for that one, that complements that sort of style of things. A nice spread out 4x12s rig with shot pretty much all the way through the rig. I'll go into a bit more detail with that later. But say it gives myself options of catching fish through the water if it turns out that they're going to have a right good feed later on, and they're going to start responding to bait hitting the surface, making lots of noise, and bait falling through the water, which now that it's waking up, it's going to start happening. They're going to start feeding on a little bit more bait, come to the bait you feed, instead of having to be negative and boring. But I'm still going to start on the negative rig just to see how things go, and say we'll go from there, see if they're having a chew today. So first up, I'm going to have a go on my negative line, or I'm going to start negatively. I've had a couple of sneaky casts already, and there's a few fish feeding, but that's definitely the safe area to start, where I'm going to feed micro pellets very, very negatively and keep them nice and accurate. So I've got literally a formal expander on that's going to catch me everything. And in today's case, I'm feeding my micro pellets a little bit different. I'm putting a ball. I'm making sure I put a ball in every single go instead of feeding them loose. Because I've got a bit of water there. I've got 4.5, 5 foot. So if I have to feed those pellets loose, like sprinkle them down, what you'll find is they sink a lot slower, so the fish can intercept them really quick, which can cause problems with liners and just make the fish not want to be on the bottom. But also by putting them in loose on the surface, what you find is that they spread, as they go down, they spread more and more and more and more. So what's an inch square cup that you feed them in ends up as probably a foot square on the bottom by the time it hits the bottom. So it makes it a great big grazing area for the fish, which if I want it to be, maybe only get 1 or 2 bites off it, if only a few fish are coming in, it's the last thing I want, because I'm giving them a much bigger area to feed on, meaning there's less chance of them finding my hook bait. So because the bottom's nice and flat, or where I'm fishing it's nice and flat anyway, I can get away with putting a ball in. And it's crazy with micro pellets, it's no matter what pellets you use, tends to be with micro pellets, it's you'll wet them and put them into a ball. It does not matter how hard you squeeze them, it's unbelievable. You look at them and think, yeah, that's knackered, that's paste. But as soon as they go into water, it's crazy how they will break down and they still form little individual pellets that look, you know, as they were when they were loose. I mean, that's done it nearly already. So don't worry about squeezing the ball too tight. So as long as you don't knead it into a complete paste, they will still separate and all be individual pellets on the bottom. So I'm going to ship out nice and slowly with this great big dodgy bank behind me. I'd say this is all about accuracy. I need to keep things as accurate as I can to give myself the best chance of any fish that come to eat these micro pellets, the best chance of finding my hook bait as well, so it's right on top of them. So I'm literally going to line up with one of those reeds on the far bank, drop that little ball in, and put my float right over the top. So I'm working to the join of my pole, which is my first helping accuracy, if you like, and then I've got a nice reed that I'm right in line with, which means I can be really, really accurate. I can put that in a couple of inch square every single time, and catch a fish quite quickly, just because I'm so accurate. Do you know what I mean? That's a bit of a lucky one, and there's obviously one there waiting from the last time I fed. But by being so accurate like that and putting that bait, I'm literally creating a method feeder sort of on the bottom. It makes bites like that happen. It makes them really quickly home in on that bait. And if my bait's on top of it, they must almost eat it in one. They just have it in one go. So that's worked almost too good, if you like. But I'm still going to keep feeding in this way. You know what I mean? Although it's early in the session and potentially it could be good. I mean, I may get away with feeding a lot of bait. I don't want to, because there's no need to. I mean, if I can catch nice and steady doing this, then why change it? Yeah, what I'll have is my other line for later, just in case too many fish start feeding. I mean, if the fish start really intercepting these micro pellets too quickly, or I start suffering from liners, foul hookers, whatever else, then I've got the option of feeding in that different way, which I'm going to talk about later on, to make the fish behave differently when there's more fish feeding, or just because they don't want to be on the bottom and this becomes wrong later on because the temperature changes or whatnot. So I'm going to go back in, and strangely what I find with this is that it's often beneficial to not feed every single cast. I mean, more than likely that feed's gone, that's all been eaten. But until I know exactly what's happening to me peg, I'd like to try and just see if there's anything there without feeding. If I keep on putting bait in and creating a build-up of bait, because I keep feeding every single cast regardless, what it'll end up is that area of feed will end up bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's more options for the fish. So by just having a little quick look after catching that one, because I caught it so quickly, there may be a chance that there's a bit of a pile left. I'm going to line everything up so I'm right over that same place. So hopefully if there is any bait left, I may be able to catch another fish off that one little tiny bit of bait, which hopefully it'll increase the life of me peg. I'm not overfeeding the fish too quickly, and I'm not spreading my bait over that greater area too fast by putting bait in when I don't need to. On the flip side of it, they might have ate all that, and I might sit here for 5 minutes now without a bite, but I'm not going to give it too long. I'm going to give it 4 or 5, or not even that, 2 or 3 minutes. If I haven't had an indication immediately, or some signs that there's fish there, I'll come straight back in and I'll feed again. But so it's much better at the start of the session just to play things a little bit carefully. Don't get too giddy with putting feed in too often, just to make sure my peg doesn't spoil. I can always put it in if I need to, whereas if I feed too often I can't take it out once it's been ruined. I think they've eaten all that already. Give that a sec. Not really an indication there. Oh, bit of an indication then, but what I'm going to do, so that quickly I can make the decision that I think that's been eaten potentially and feed again, and by the reaction of this cast it'll tell me exactly pretty much what's going on down there, whether they're responding to me bait really quickly and eating it, or whether I need to hang back a little bit, not feed so often, just be a bit more patient and catch what I can. So just like little experiment sort of things in that way, it can tell you a lot very, very quickly in your session and save you spoiling things. Just want to make sure I put that ball in exactly the same place every time if I can. So again, little tiny things like that just lead to that smaller feed area that will hopefully lead to a few more bites. See what happens on that. See that so quickly that they're without a doubt wanting a bit of bait today. So I'm more than happy now. Oh, that was in the mouth. I'm more than happy to keep repeating that every cast until things go wrong. So, and it's when things do go wrong later on, either that you find that this time of year, often in the middle of them, actually goes to a complete lull period when everyone sort of stops catching, but that can often be the signal to start pushing things on a different area, or maybe where you're fishing, for what's to come. You find that your last 2 hours at this time of year, it can be a really, really good fishing spell. So by changing things completely to what I'm going to show you next, hopefully in that period, that can give you a chance of catching a lot of fish later on when you sort of think things have gone wayward. Or you make it a lot better because you're having problems on this line. This could get too good and I could end up with a lot of fish on the line, and this other line I'm going to show you next is going to fix any issues that we have with that. Right, so I probably had an hour and a half fishing on my negative line, and luckily it's gone exactly as sort of I'd hoped, if anything. At first I thought it was going to go solid and it was going to be like a summer day's fishing, but it hasn't. I caught a nice little run, probably 6 or 7 fish really quickly by being accurate, but then what tends to happen is slowly as I fed my peg, they end up with too much bait on the bottom, and because there were so few fish in the area, I started to struggle to get bites. And when I did get a bite, it was often foul-hooked because there was so much bait on the bottom, so many numbers of pellets. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to completely swap now to my hard pellet line, or where I've chosen to fish hard pellets, just to give myself more option of feeding bait in different ways to see how them fish want to feed. So what I've got, I'm just going to feed some nice little 4mm hard pellets. I'm going to give them a quick little dunk in my expander tub, where I use to wet my expanders, just so they're all wet, just so I know that they're going to sink as best as they can when I go out there. And to begin with, I'm going to introduce everything with a pot. So the last thing I want to do is get my catty out and go for it before I know what's going to go on. You know what I mean? There's nothing nicer than feeding a load of bait, but in reality, I could potentially blow it to bits just because I'm still not quite sure of what they're going to want. So I'm going to start fishing, or start feeding in a very similar way to what I was doing with micro pellets. But I say with this type of bait, I've got the option of changing things very, 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 very quickly. So the one thing that I do lose by fishing this bait in this way is the accuracy that I could maintain with the micro pellets. Now, because I've got such a light rig, just gonna make some noise with them pellets. It's a lot more difficult to keep it stable, but so that the lightness benefits so much more when they want to feed through the water later on potentially. So I've just shook them pellets in, just to try and make a little bit of noise, just to just to try and attract a few fish nice and quickly into the area, and see that they're definitely responding really quickly, almost as you'd expect them to do with how they behaved initially on the micro pellet line. So what I need to do now, oh, these fell off. I felt right that then as well. I'm not sure what happened then. That felt like it was in the mouth, but same again, I'm going to put some bait in my pot straight away, just in case, but I'm not going to feed this bait when I go in this time, just because there's definitely still some bait on the bottom. So what I've got now though, now that I've swapped to 4mm, I can actually get away with feeding a little bit more often, just because the numbers are reduced so much. Like when I was feeding those balls of micro pellets on my other line, there's a lot of pellets in a little ball of micro pellets. There's, who knows, you know what I mean, it's probably 50 micro pellets. There's a lot of individual parcels on the bottom, individual pellets all over the place. With me 4mm, I mean, I can control it so much better. I'm feeding 10. I mean, I know I'm feeding 10 to 12 sort of every single go. I'm just going to say I don't want to feed immediately over the top of that line, because I got a bite so quick. See, I've got another one, so now I'm going to rattle my pellets in. So they're definitely responding really well to that noise. So it'd be what I've got to play with now that I know that my bait's attracting fish into the peg, I've just got to be really careful with that noise now. I don't want to make noise too often and make them fish come off the bottom too quickly and make them go a bit silly. Do you know what I mean? Catch them how they want to feed to begin with. So because there's only going to be a few in my peg initially, I mean, I'll sort of feed as I did then, hook my fish and then feed, and that gives me the maximum amount of time for that bait to get to the bottom, any fish to go down and settle on it, and it'll reduce my liners by going in and not feeding, just putting my rig straight in. Hopefully I'll get a clean bite quicker and for longer as well, for a few casts before a few more fish potentially come into the bag and it goes a bit silly. Let's get this one in. It's weird, this is no coincidence. The amount of venues I fish that, for when it comes to proper commons and mirrors, hard pellets are just so much more productive than micro pellets. For what reason? Not a clue. I mean, it's probably size, I'd imagine, a bit more of a mouthful for them, but they just eat hard pellets. These are, and this stamp of fish as well, these are official hard pellet munchers. But we'll see how it goes. So I say I'm not going to feed, same again, but I'm going to get my feed ready in my pot, just to maintain accuracy. Say I'm not going to put any in until I've hooked that fish. I say at first I'm going to keep everything fed through a pot, just to keep everything as accurate as possible, just because I'm still scared of blowing my peg. Even though it's so good and we're getting bites so quick, it's so fragile at this time of year to really go for it. Blast bait all over the place. It's one bad move and my entire peg's knackered instantly. Just lay that in nice and quietly. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to continue with this for a little bit. And if it's working, great. You know what I mean? I'm catching nice and efficiently, nice and quickly as soon as I put my rig in. It's right. What I have got that I can play with now that I'm on this type of bait is that at any time I need to, if I've not got any bait in my pot, because I've fed my bait because I've not had a bite or whatever, I can pick my catty up and feed at any time, introduce a bit of bait, try and make something happen. So I'm going to use noise and bait falling through the water as an attraction property only. I mean, at first I'm going to write that in my cup, just because that's the most accurate way of being, and see if that works. If that doesn't, and I need to get a catty out to make a bit more noise, spread my bait a little bit more, just to put bait in more regularly to make fish come into my bag, then the catty will come in and I'll do that as well, but only to attract fish. What I want to do is to attract them there and then go back to cupping every single time to keep them sort of tightened up as accurately as I possibly can, but also to try and stop them coming off the bottom. So that was nice, that just sat there lovely. Very, very few little indications and a proper bite, which is exactly what I'm trying to get at this time of year. Can't believe how well it's fishing today. So we're about 4 days into, about 6 days into some really lovely 10-degree weather. And finally, everything seems to be just starting to change. I mean, there's been a few fish topping today. It just feels good all of a sudden. We'll soon be catching shallow. Not today. Oh, that's 2 and a flipping bounce. I lost that. Again, there's nothing up with that one. That's just me pulling too hard and a folly offy. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue with this for a little bit, because I do want to catch a few fish, and then shortly, if I feel the peg's capable of doing so, we're going to change things. We're going to get catty out and we're going to see if we can really go for it. Just take the chance. So we're not in a match today, so we can really go for it, see if we can really get them having a feed. Right, so I've probably had another hour's fishing on this line, and again, so there's definitely clearly plenty of fish feeding now. We had a little bit of a lull in the middle as expected, but now we're what? Probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock, so it's feeding time, they're ready to have a go now. But what I found on this line is, whereas my negative line sort of fizzled out because there was too much bait, what's happened on this line is there's almost too many fish there now, and despite trying what I can to feed at the right times to keep them on the bottom, that they don't want to be. You know what I mean? It's got nice and warm, the sun's really come out now, and everything wants to be feeding, not necessarily shallow, but they seem to be intercepting my bait through the water a lot. So because of that, I've got to change what I'm doing. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep picking off the odd fish and foul looking a good percentage, because they don't want to be where my hook bait is if I'm just leaving it sat on the bottom. So I've completely discarded my pot. So this is where my little strung out rig's really going to come in. Like I said, I've got a 412 strung out carbon stem float, dead similar to what I use my maggot fishing and my hard pellet fishing in summer as well. And what that's going to give me is a lovely slow fall through the water. So I've got my spot still marked up. So just before I get out there, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my catty out and I'm going to start feeding a little bit of bait with catapult. So I'm going to put it into the peg, quickly ship out and lay my feed in with it, just to make me nice and quick and put my bait right in the right place. So it's going in with the loose feed, instead of shipping in and then feeding over the top, because if I do that, then my bait's going to sink quicker anyway. So it's going to be the first one when the fish haven't really got excited yet, because they haven't heard that bait come in, and immediately had an indication on the drop. Then I'm laying that rig in a nice long line right over that area of feed I just put in with the catty. I'd say hopefully the versatility of this rig, say a nice light hook bait with a nice strung out rig, now it's going to give me the option of catching fish through the water as well as on the bottom. I mean, I can still catch plenty of fish once it has settled. Do you mean I'll probably give it, here we go, straight away, I'll probably give it 30, 40 seconds, no, probably 30 seconds once it reaches the end of its descent and see if I catch it on deck. But if not, I'm going to lift that rig out and lay it in. So I'm constantly trying to make something happen, and I want to catch them fish on their terms where they want to be, instead of being a stubborn bugger and just wants to catch them with a pot on the bottom like so many of us are guilty of. We don't respond to what the fish want. We try and make them do what we want, which for me, it's a massive big mistake. As at this time of year, it's something you've really got to keep your eyes open for, because they change ever so quick. So he's lovely, and that one's came, I'd say 10 seconds maximum after that bait touches the bottom. So for me, it's almost certain, he's lovely in the top lip as well, almost certain that he's seen those pellets coming down, he's picking a few up, and he's had mine as they've settled on the bottom. So we're going to try again just to see if that weren't a fluke. Yeah, nice little 4mm on. So for me, 4mm this time of year, they just seem about right. So maybe if they're fishing for great big lads, maybe a 6 would be a good move. But 4s, I just find that they sink, they're just nice, they sink nice and slow. You catch every size of carp on them. So for me, that's my go-to pellet. So I'm still feeding the same amount as what I was feeding with a pot. Putting 10 in, I'm going to put 2 lots in there. Put 2 lots of 10 in, but before I get out there, although it seems as if it's slowing you down because you're stopping to feed, but what you are doing, you're doing it in the right order. So I'm putting my bait in with my loose feed rather than shipping out there, then feeding, then picking my rig up and laying it in. It just makes everything happen a bit more fluently. I'm shipping out halfway in. That's if I want to catch on the drop anyway. Obviously, if I don't get a bite after, here we go. So definitely following them pellets down today. If I don't get a bite, or I miss a couple of bites maybe, and then the action fizzles out, which again often happens, then I can just pick my catty up, feed again, and I'm catching them on the terms of that single feed every time. I put that one lot of bait in, or a couple of lots of bait in, and then I fish it out. I mean, I try and make the most of the attraction that one little bit of bait's caused, and try and catch any fish that have homed in on it and that have followed it down, or that are picking them pellets up half depth. Right, well, in all honesty, it's amazed me how good it's even gone today. I can't believe how well the fish are responding. Since picking the catty up, the fish has been phenomenal. It's been absolutely one a chuck, but it's strange in that they're really well behaved. I've foul looked very few fish since I started catty, and they've been quite well behaved with proper bites. But also, there's not a massive amount of fish actually intercepting bait on the way down yet. So while the noise is pulling lots of fish in, they're staying on the bottom as long as I feed at the right time. That's probably the key lesson, or the thing that sprung to mind more than anything, is the importance of cattying my bait in at the right time. So by doing it just before or sort of halfway along shipping out, so it's probably giving them pellets 10 seconds to get halfway down or whatever they get in the water column, and then put my rig over the top. That has without doubt been the best time for me to feed, because I've tried both feeding after I've hooked a fish, and I've tried feeding as I put my rig in. And both in the other ways of feeding, it's been a little bit erratic. I've missed a few more bites. They're just not, they're not going down, and they're not as happy to be on the bottom and to feed in the way that I want them to. But overall, it couldn't have gone better for showing. The key point of starting off negatively, we missed the bite then, just to feel your way in, and then progressing to really push it if you feel your peg's allowed. I mean, if your peg's capable of, with enough fish present, and you can push it as far as you want to, depending on how many fish you're feeding. So starting off negative today showed me really quickly that there's plenty of fish feeding, but at no point have I put myself in a position where I could potentially knacker my peg until right at the end, when I feel there's lots of fish and I can actually go for it. So we've got another one now. So, but other than that, so hopefully you've learned a little bit. I've definitely learned a little bit, and it's been so nice catching a few fish. This has been the first session of the year when they finally switched on, and hopefully now we're looking forward to a right good summer catching fish. But other than that, hopefully we learned a bit, and we'll see you on the bank next time.